Hi, everyone. Before we get started today, we just wanted to give a big shout out because we just got 1,000 subscribers on YouTube in about 10 episodes. So that's great. We're really grateful for you here at HLI for listening and watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And if you're already subscribed or if you haven't, please share the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment. Thank you so much. We're really grateful. Couldn't do this without you. God bless. Hello, welcome to the Culture of Life podcast from Human Life International. As ever, I'm Tad Wojcik, the Mission Research Specialist, here with Father Shenan Boquet.
Good to be with you all, as always, Tad.
Yes, absolutely, Father. Here we go. We're talking about a recent article you wrote about rediscovering a Christian vision of sex and marriage. And people can find that on the HLI website, of course, as always. But it's really talking about, actually, how about, Father, you introduce what brought up this topic? And I think we'll maybe, there's an impetus, as always, and then kind of shift to church teaching and kind of general topic discussion on the topic.
Sure, Ted. As always with any of my articles, it normally is sparked by something either someone sent me to read or maybe something I've kind of read in the headlines, and this is an example of one of these situations where an article comes across, an essay actually, and as I'm reading this essay by Christine Emba, talking about consent, but basically looking at, she's writing about
and that's in the Washington Post, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's happening is she's looking at the situation in her age bracket, kind of in people in the younger generation who is confronting a culture where you're seeing abuses within sexual relationships and a litany of complications as a result of people engaging in sexual relationships outside of marriage. And so she's looking at this consent culture in a sense that, people, is consent enough? In other words, if two people, freely say to each other, I agree to have relations with you, that should be enough. But unfortunately, what's happened is the complications with these relationships continue to unmask. And this is what she's dealing with, because people are telling her stories of difficulties, and they're asking questions as she's compiling all this information. And, and especially as people have become more addicted to pornography and how the whole understanding that is being, or the narrative, I should say, that's being promoted by the pornography industry, is further pushing the boundaries of sexual relationships and, from the ideas of when does something become abusive? When is abuse? When has someone crossed the line? And these are things that she's talking about, and people are asking her, is this too much? What more should I be doing? Should I say no? And so she's trying to kind of resolve this dilemma that she sees, and she recognizes a dilemma, which I think is it's interesting, and I think it's a good thing that the question is being asked. I mean, I don't agree with where Christine takes, the whole conversation, but it allows a conversation to be had because she's raising legitimate questions. And as the Catholic Church has always done, it has an answer. And it has an answer based in a truth about the human person and about the gift of human sexuality and the beauty that God has created in man and woman. So I think it's a great opportunity, Tad, to pick something from the headlines, to pick a story and to really, hear what people think and then be able to respond to it. And that's what this article does, and I, again, as I said, it's not something I'm agreeing with. When people read the article, hopefully it doesn't give any impression, because I do mention some comments of Ms. Emba that I think are worthy, that there's insight, that she brings. It's not complete, it's not a thorough movement, but she does raise very legitimate points, and they're worth listening to and reflecting on. So I'm hoping that those that take time to read my article, will then maybe move toward the essay and really read it with an open mind, not to agree, not to confirm, not to affirm, but to really understand how many people, what they're thinking today, what's in the general mindset of people who are in their 18 to 30-year-olds particularly, what's happening in that culture today.
Right, and it's very interesting because basically it's, just to recap what you were just saying, it's kind of like a young woman questioning the popular wisdom, at least you can put that in quotes, what the current cultural ethic is in regards to sexuality. And basically saying, let's subvert it, and not really subvert it, overthrow it, and have kind of this. It's you start your article with an analogy that G.K. Chesterton gave in his my favorite work of his anyway, called Orthodoxy, where he's talking about an explorer who is going away from England in search of new lands, and he comes back to England after a storm, thinking that it's a different place, and he and thinks it's his new
territory.
But it's actually just home,
and claims it for England.
Right.
It claims it for England,
right, like the moon or something. Right. But anyway, it seems that that's what Miss Emba is doing as well, because she's saying, let's have. And you because you read the article, I actually didn't, but an ethic of sexuality based on mutual self-gift. Does she use those words even? Right. And it's funny because that's what we've always kind of had.
Right.
So anyway,
and we'll come to that a little bit and discuss that a little bit for our listenership. But it's interesting when you think of G.K. Chesterton, and he's reflecting. And even says, I thought I was going to go out and create what he calls a brand new heresy. In other words, a great new teaching, only to come back and find that the very teaching I was rejecting is the very truth I find. And I think that's, what made me think about Miss Emba, because I think down deep, which she, and many of her the people that she interviewed, mostly young ladies, mostly women, and, it's just what they're searching for, there's something deep within the human person that knows that something is good and it knows that something's wrong. And what they're sensing is that these behaviors, these deep, and I would call deviant behaviors, because what's happening is as one of the quotes in here, and again, I warn, the audience, and especially those reading, I do get a little detailed, and as you read the essay, it gets a little more detailed. But the reality is you have young women that are asking, is choking okay during a sexual encounter?
Meaning they're, the men are choking them.
Right, exactly. And so as I point out, they realize that this is something not right. But we've given consent. We've given permission. To have an encounter and the sexual experience. And so, and one young woman asked, is there something wrong with this? Should I be concerned? And it's like, of course you should, because something within you realizes that this is not an expression of love. And that's really where we start getting into some misunderstandings, some confusion, a falsification of the word love. And I think it's important as we talk about this is to return. That's what I really always take an opportunity in these articles to pull back to the church's teaching, to pull back to these principles. And as I've been doing as of late, I've been bringing a few things with me. So again, just to introduce our audience to some of the texts, some of the church's documents. And one of the first things that I would bring, because as I'm writing the article, I'm thinking of what does the church teach and where do we get these teachings from? And most recently, the encyclical that came to mind, of course, and I used for this, is Humanae Vitae.
Go ahead and show that a little on the camera.
So on human life, so by Paul VI. Mm-hmm. And particularly I'm looking at paragraphs 8, 9, and 10. And so, and then I brought a book that actually was a wonderful book on the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae, and I'm going to read from it. This is one that I would encourage, everyone to take advantage of. It's a worthwhile text to acquire and to reflect upon what the church's teaching is concerning human sexuality, conjugal love, marriage, and it's a great text, and it opens up, with an understanding, Tad, that helps us to move to respond to Miss Emba's questions. She's really posing a question here. She's asking, is consent enough? And as she gets down in her article, and I mentioned this, and she moves towards a kind of a reference, she references St. Thomas, who talks about mutual self-giving, this understanding of, this is how it should be.
Right. In particular, I think his definition of love to will the good of the other, which I just thought was so fascinating. Right. That's a very clear indication that grace is working in her.
Exactly.
just like it did with Chesterton, and however long that would take, hopefully she would continue to respond and kind of, because this is literally the angelic doctor
right.
teaching her,
Well, maybe because we're using her name, maybe she'll have a chance to listen to this podcast. It might come up, in her own looking, and maybe we'll post something to give her something to think about. And maybe you just did that, Tad. I think it's wonderful. And so here in the very introduction, and the introduction here is written by Archbishop Charles Chaput, the retired Archbishop of Philadelphia. And here he just starts, a few pages into the introduction by bringing us right back to the issue. So he starts by talking about the errors of the sexual revolution. So if we go back to the 1960s, and Tad, you and I have had this conversation in many articles, because this is where all these falsifications, they didn't just start there, but we found they found a kind of a ground to plant their seeds. And so it happened in there, and he starts with this. It became rooted in a false understanding of freedom, a false understanding of autonomy. And meaning that, that because I can do something and I'm free to do it, then I should be able to do it. And so when it comes to the whole issue of an expression of a sexual encounter, I begin to literally dissect, the total person that we should be looking at, the human person, made in the image and likeness of God, which is the quote I'm going to read in a few moments. And then just kind of, you dissect that person, and you only focus in on emotion and the feelings and the biological expression. So you start looking only at the physicality, and we fail to look at the person in their totality, who is a person that's made up of body and spirit, body and soul. And when you start having that dualistic understanding, it creates a whole level of problems that we're seeing. That's what we're talking about. And again, Miss Emba's not thinking on that level. But this is where the conversation that G.K. Chesterton would say, this is where it should bring her. She's searching. She's asking the right questions. She maybe not starting with the right premise, but she's searching. She's trying to answer a question. I think it's a great move, and I hope, as you just said, and I hope you're right, is that because the Spirit of God is always moving among us, and when someone really is sincerely seeking, and I think that reading the essay, I think Ms. Emba is seeking, she's asking, and that maybe she'll continue to search and find the fullness of that truth. So here's what the Archbishop said. And he said, going back to Humani Vitae, he says, stands on a central belief that God made men and women in his image to be made, and this is oftentimes people will ask, well, what does that mean? And I love very simply how the Archbishop answers it. And he says, to be made in God's image speaks of God's desire to love us, his invitation to share in his life, and the inherent gifts that he gives to each man and woman. So if we just start right that, so that God desires to love us. So this made in his image is a reflection that God has made us for love, and he's made us for himself, and he's made us to be loved, and to love him, and to love each other. And so it's an invitation to share in his life. And so starting with this understanding means all of my actions, all that I am is to fulfill those ends, to move toward that. And so any deviation of it begins to warp that understanding. And if I treat myself that way, that's one thing, not a good. But if I start treating you that way, then I've also, caused another harm. I'm harming you. And this is what Ms. Emba is she's kind of getting underneath, but she doesn't yet know how to answer it fully.
And it's interesting to me that kind of strikes at the heart of what you were just talking about a second ago with this kind of the one governing principle of the relativistic age is you just, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, right? Consent in any activity, but especially sexuality. But even we're getting to that point where, like as is in the article with the choking stuff, that's not even being upheld in the first place.
Right.
But even discarding that, what you're saying is at the base of it, that attitude of transactionalism already is doing harm to the other and to oneself.
That's correct. Because it's treating the human person as objectifying, and it's very utilitarian. It's very, it's kind of, so it's almost in a way, and I don't want to get too detailed, but all of a sudden, let's say that I consented to a certain behavior and something else changes. Do we just pause and then, okay, hold on, let's renew this contract here. I consent only to this far.
And that's what some people have even suggested is the proper model for the sexual ethic.
So basically, it's an ever-evolving situation. But if we start, and this is what the Archbishop is not obviously Archbishop's teaching, he's raising the answer of the church. And this is what is the answer to the sexual revolution. It's the answer to all of the great tyrannies that we've seen over the decades and centuries against humanity. That it starts with the human person. Everything starts with an understanding of who the human person is. And again, it's the inherent gifts. So these are gifts that are inalienable. They are immutable. They're unchangeable. They're not something that you give to me. It's not something I give to myself. They are innate. They are part of me. And so here, if we start in that way, and that's what he says, so foremost is the capacity to love just like God. Now, there lies the answer to being made in the image and likeness of God, to love like God. And so what does that mean? Well, I'll come back to this. But, here in Humanae Vitae itself, directly quoting Humanae Vitae, the document I'm pointing to, sorry, you can't see the table, I apologize, in paragraphs 8 and 9, Paul VI goes through what that means. So if we consider, and I'm going to return back to this, because here he's answering that. He says, to be able to be faithful, so look at these words, faithful, trustworthy, merciful, compassionate, and forgiving are just a sampling, and Archbishop says, of the endless list of attributes that reflect when we say the image of God. So if we think about what we're talking about, these when we begin to move away from what God's intention for the human person is, and the intention for the goods that the human person is to live, and one of those goods is love for others, love for my neighbor, love for friends, love for family, and a great top of that pyramid is for those who are the majority of our population called to the marital state. A full expression of that love where two people, a man and a woman, give themselves to each other in an exclusive, fruitful, a union that is indissoluble. And so that becomes a reflection of God. That very union is a reflection of God. And in that love is trustworthiness, fidelity, kindness, gentleness, compassion, mercy, and self-giving. So which brings us back to St. Thomas, and that the very fact that every waking moment that she both think of each other and each other's good and well-being, causing no harm, which that's what I started the article with, quoting St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, and it's true. I mean, and so when we start with that understanding, Ted, it really is simple. It's not complicated. We complicate it. And that's why, what the Archbishop does in this particular text is by starting with the falsification that we see in the teachings, we'll call them teachings, but teachings of the sexual revolution. They're falsifications. They falsify the human person, and they falsify the goods, and one of those goods being human sexuality. And for us, as we've always taught in our history and in our faith, in our Judeo-Christian root, is that marriage is the only place, within marriage, is the only place where the sexual expression of man and woman is to be fully expressed. That's it. So immediately once we take it out of that context and we place it into another context, we redefine it, we falsified it. And that's why, what Ms. Emba is raising are again, hoping that maybe she will continue to if she reads St. Thomas, and I have some quotes here from St. Thomas in this same book if we have time, but it just goes to the heart of what she's quoting, that for a husband, that only seeks the good of his wife. So he strives through grace, of course, cooperation with grace, and in recognition of the beauty of the person he is and she is, does nothing to harm that good. That his mind is always striving for the well-being and the happiness and the joy of the person he loves with all of his heart, with all of his strength, and with all of his being. which for any of our audience who are married, remember the vows they made. Whether they made up their own in some of the other faith traditions or within the Catholic faith where those vows are fully expressed, to love, to hold, to have until to death do us part. Those speak of the image of God. This is a faithful union. It's an indissoluble union. It is a union that is filled with always the good of the other and to seek that good. Then the human love, the conjugal love, the marital act that we're talking about here, takes on a richer and fuller meaning. And that is why the church teaches about the beautiful ends of marriage. That didn't come up in the essay by any means. But, as you read the essay, you're realizing, well, any act outside of a marital union is it's not a marital act. It's an act of fornication. It falsifies the beautiful act of human love between a husband and wife. And so that's the part where we're not getting. Consent doesn't do that. And so, for example, a husband and wife, before they share conjugal intimacy, don't ask for consent in the sense of they're not going to sit there and say, do you consent to A, to consent to B? What it means is that we've already started, in a relationship that both have mutual respect, mutual care, mutual love, mutual feeling for each other, and it's unhindered. There's no contract here. There's not an issue of, does this person really care? No, this person loves because we've committed to that love. And that faithful love, that trustworthy love, that compassionate love, all that love is wrapped in these acts because they're not a single act. They are, if you want to say, one curtain has been pulled. And it's one act moving through time, and it unfolds itself time and time again. It unwraps itself beautifully.
And that's what the proclamation of marriage is between a man and a woman, right? And well, there's so much to talk about here. But kind of to recap, I wanted to mention something that you were talking about. That the Archbishop Chaput had written, that we're made in the image and likeness of God, meaning we can love like God. That's in fact best expressed in human sexuality in the sense of creation, right? Because
Correct.
God is, again, St. Thomas, eternal self-gift, right? Between the persons of the Trinity, right? And the generation of the Holy Spirit through the Father's love of the Son, right? And the mutual love there. That's exactly what the human family is, and right, that's why the sexual act is never separable from at least the possibility of conception, right? Not that every sexual act has to have a conception to be valid, but that it must be open to it because it's ordered towards that.
That's
right?
correct. And to do anything other, that's why the church's teaching on contraception makes perfect sense when we understand it in the heart of what we're talking about. Because to do anything contrary to what you just beautifully expressed, referencing St. Thomas, but referencing the church's teaching, means that I have done something contrary to love. I've introduced another kind of act that is not the kind of act that marital love is, which is unitive and fruitful, procreative. And so this is why the church has been consistent in her teaching, which goes back to Humanae Vitae, when the whole world, the majority of the world, were looking for the church to reject her teaching in this regard. And what Paul VI said, we can't, because this is the teaching. To do otherwise would be to reject what God has revealed to us. And so today, this conversation that we're having, this is helps us to better understand why the church teaches about any sexual activity outside of marriage is sinful. Why is it sinful? We've explained it. Why, if I purposely intend and act upon that intention to block the openness to human life, I have falsified this union. And that's why, when people say, well, I still love this individual. Well, you're expressing a sense of love, but you're saying one thing, but you're doing something different. And so that's what we're talking about here. Now, again, Ms. Emba is not talking on this level. She's looking purely at, because let's be honest, we have the mores of sexuality have been untied, and for decades now. And for you and for myself, which I quote in the article, the whole issue of lust, the whole issue of fornication, and those words are not even part of vocabulary today. People think that basically I should be free, to act sexually if I so desire, and if a person wishes to engage with me in that act and they give their consent, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's based in a feeling, it's based in physicality, it's based in just a pure, expression of emotion, and so, but what we're speaking of is obviously moving that conversation to something which is much more profound in a sense of an understanding of the nature of the human person. And that's the part that's not being elevated in the essay.
Right.
And that's why I picked it up. Because it really does give us a chance. Because the church is often, which the church has got, has got thick skin. She's been condemned many times over. She's been, told that, she's old age. She's living in the past. But the church in her teaching is ever fresh, and it's always new in the sense that it's always the beauty and wonder of what God has revealed to us. And if we just stand up, and we talk about it, and we express it. This is what I love about our Newman Centers, in the universities, because so many of our young adults come to these universities from so many different backgrounds. Some have already come with different loads of experience, sometimes, many sexual experiences, and they meet these beautiful chaplains and lay leaders, and they're introduced, especially on our Catholic universities, and sometimes not Catholic universities. I can think of a number of them where their Newman Centers are just phenomenal. And they bring what we're talking about, Tad, to the surface, and unashamed, in which we shouldn't be. We should never be ashamed of what the truth is. And I think it's awesome because it's probably the first time they've heard this. So, again, what Miss Emba is doing, I imagine how many people, when reading that essay, were feeling similar things that she herself is expressing. And some of the quotes that she takes from some of these ladies that she's interviewed, I imagine many people reading and going, "Well, I've been in that situation," and they're reflecting. And what I'm hoping is that, as we said earlier, that the conversation will move, that people will realize, that this is not, there's something wrong here, and and as we've seen. Because in the narrative today, with pornography being so prolific, with so many people actually being addicted to pornography today, there are so many people that are basing their relationships on what they see in pornography. They're acting it out or trying to reenact it. And we're seeing a number of abuses that are coming from that within marriages and non-marital relationships. And so now it's a matter of we have to keep pushing the conversation. And so my little article is just that one little stab in the ground. But I know that I'm not alone. I know a number of people who are picking stories up like this and writing about it, talking about it. To me, it's a great opportunity on some of the Newman Centers. This would be a great article to raise up on some of their catechism courses and their classes and talk about.
Or even to promote in secular classes, or
Absolutely.
Just talk about, hey, this is Washington Post.
Right.
This is not an explicitly, it's referencing St. Thomas, but it's not
Right.
advancing the Christian ethic, at least not all the way.
Right.
But let's talk about that actually, Father, because I wanted to kind of just maybe rehash this a little bit or transition, because I think we discussed some of this, but just kind of maybe more explicitly now talk about how people like Miss Emba are calling for a mutual self-gift in sexuality, a new, quote, new sexual ethic that is based on that concept, rather than just consent or, But I don't think that in as much as that's Christian tradition and the teaching of the church, that's not new. But I don't think that's people aren't going to be ready to go there yet. So I wanted to kind of address this question of that a lot of people will have. Well, we can still have this mutual self-gift ideal while including all the other things that the sexual revolution, people would say, has gifted us with, like fornication, they would say just premarital sex, or kind of a looser attitude towards sexuality, homosexuality in particular, I think people talk about, and other kinds of, sexual deviations.
Well, I think we were talking about, again, Tad, those are the attempts at redefining, And so just even to make reference, to some other kinds of relationships. So as I mentioned earlier, so the because we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that we're made to live in that love and to express that love in that image which we have been made. So we have friendships, we have family relationships, we have kindness that we show toward each other. There's many ways to express that love, that care, that concern, that mutual desire for the good of another human being. But it is fully and completely, it finds its end, it finds its fulfillment in living in accord in which how God has created. And so when we consider the fact that man and woman, in which he has made, man and woman, and only within that kind of relationship in the marital bond between man and woman can this love be fully expressed in sexual union, conjugal love, the conjugal act, and that the ends can be fulfilled and actualized. The union of husband and wife, man and woman, and the openness always in transmission of human life. And so when we speak about other kinds of relationships, that are happening in our culture today, those are attempts, to redefine what God himself has created. So to do that, creates, for example, you mentioned the issue of a homosexual union. Well, that relationship in and of itself cannot fulfill the very way that God has made man and woman, and the very way in which human sexuality expresses that likeness and image of God. Because why? Well, just on its face value, it can never be fruitful. It can never be procreative. It cannot do through a natural means, okay? We see today, and as we've talked about on other occasions, we have in our technology, our science industry, our technology industry, we can help couples, same-sex individuals to acquire, a child, but it can never be created in the sense of co-created in the natural bond, of a sexual union between a man and a woman.
And in those cases, still you need, if it's two men who want a child, they still need someone's egg from somewhere.
Exactly.
Right, some woman's egg.
So what we're doing there is, so it's important is to really be able to distinguish between, as the relationship that we're speaking of in this situation is that which God has created in the union of man and woman in what we call the marital bond. That's the relationship we're speaking about here. And then what we're also talking about, with Ms. Emba is bringing up, is the fact that she's not even talking about the marital bond here. That's not what she's referencing. The whole article is really based on non-marital relationships
Probably, yeah, right. I mean, that was kind of what I was getting at. Right. Is there's even more than homosexuality? I think there's still going to be this
right.
attempt to recoup losses and say, okay, but we can still have live-in boyfriends or whatever.
Right. But you think about those relationships, and even the most well-intended. So let's go back to those words that Archbishop Chaput is mentioning. So we're looking at fidelity, a faithfulness, an indissoluble relationship. So in any of the relationship we're talking about, let's get out of the divorce mentality. Okay, that's been a very, unfortunately, a fruit of the sexual revolution. And so divorce is caused great harm, to families and to individuals.
In some ways, it might have been the precipitator of the, people talk about the pill in the 60s. Well, maybe the original thing was actually legalization of no-fault divorce in the 30s in the U.S.
But you think about what that means. So we've taken that which is meant to be indissoluble, and we've now made it dissoluble. So what's happened here? So we've changed something. We've changed what God has created in the marital bond between man and woman. And so what happens in these non-marital relationships, as well-intended as they may be, as long, maybe sometimes decades long, there's never a moment when that person can't walk out. That person can leave. So what keeps them there? What is it? So the question here that we want to pose is, in that marital union between man and woman, both in the expression of their vows, their commitment to each other, they are fulfilling and actualizing, the very image and likeness that they have been made to live. And that is that to live that faithful union, to live that relationship until death do them part, to reflect that this is a union that is a bond forever, for my lifetime. and that every day and every moment of my life is dedicated to live for the good and well-being of that individual. And so to do that, and it doesn't mean that other people can't express those kinds of things, and they do. I mean, but it's never going to reach its completion and it's for what it's intended because of because we've redefined it. We've made it into our own image, kind of our own conditions.
Trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, right?
Right. And I mean, having been, a priest now 29 years, I've been with many couples in different times of their lives.
That's funny, Father, because I was going to play devil's advocate and say, hey, Father, you're a priest. What do you know about this?
But you listen to people, you hear their stories, their dilemmas in life, and many times, all these things can find resolution if we live in accord in the way that God has made us and what He's made us for. And so every time we attempt to reorient, kind of change, what God has created, we always end up in a very bad situation, and it builds on other bad situations, and it just escalates and escalates. And the one thing that I've seen, with this beautiful understanding of marriage is, when you meet couples of 40 years and 50 years and 60 years and so forth, and you begin to know and to listen to their journey. And how all these words that we're talking, these are words, right? And these are the ways that we try to express what Revelation has revealed to us about the nature of God and our understanding of God and how God has revealed that to us, and what I have come to know about the human person in relationship to our Creator. And you see it in marriage. You really come face to face with it, because you come face to face with these words, and they're not words any longer. They're lived. They're fully expressed in the gentle love and the caring love and the passionate love and the beauty of caring for another human being and living for the good of that person and seeking their well-being in every manner and sacrificing for that good and making the necessary sacrifices for the good of the family. And to be there, and no one is thinking, nor should be thinking, will they be here tomorrow? It's understood. I'm here until death do us part, and that not from a ball and chain kind of mentality. It's I'm here because I love you, and I'm here through it all, and we're going to grow together. We're going to mature together. We're going to make mistakes together, and we're going to heal together. It's all the way through. There's never an out, and that sounds to our secular ear, well, that kind of hinges on my freedom. It kind of prevents me from, maybe I just don't like this anymore. I want to try something new. But when we hear the language, it pushes us in a direction to see the good and to see the potential of how that good can shape our lives and shape our culture and shape our understanding. And I think we've definitely, our ears have become deaf to that. And it's obvious that Ms. Emba sees it. I mean, from what her interviews are showing her. And if we just read the data that is out there from all the various surveys and the various studies and the various, even from the secular side of the equation, people are suffering, they're struggling, and they're enduring some great difficulties in this so-called sexual revolution. And so what she's elevating is an opportunity for us, Tad, to have an honest conversation. Something is wrong. Something is wrong. And basically, just rewriting a sexual ethic, trying to create another language, another way is not going to resolve it, because people are going to still look for, again, what's that edge? How far can I get? What's the bare minimum I need to do? But in this situation, there's never a bare minimum. For a husband and wife, and even for you and myself, Tad, neither one of us are married, all right? And so I'm called to that kind of love too, which goes a little bit to what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And the idea is that the love that I am to give toward others is the same, but it's expressed differently. And
well, I would say actually it's greater. In fact, your vocation is higher.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the idea, the call,
the nature of
the
love,
faithfulness of that love, the compassionate, the mercy, the tenderness, the concern for another human being, that should be in all of us, which is the universal command of love.
Right.
And so, but we see it fully, so beautifully expressed in marital love. And there you see it in how just the aging through time, and how that love just grows, and it's meant to grow. The Pope Benedict XVI used to say that the heart is meant to be stretched, and it is. And you see it in marital love, you see it in individual love, you see it in friendships. But it has a boundary. That the way that I can express love to another human being has a limitation. To it. By its very nature, I'm not married. I'm not called to express myself in that manner. But an act of charity, an act of kindness, well, yes, I'm called to that same level of love, to care for my neighbor, to be concerned about the well-being of my neighbor. Absolutely. But in the sense of what we see within marriage, it can only be celebrated within marriage. And that's the conversation that is not being, advanced. And that's why I wrote the article. Most of our readership at HLI is going to be obviously have this understanding. But I just don't write to our own audience. This gets picked up by other people, and many other people share it with their family and their friends, and it's a chance to have a conversation. And what I'm hoping is that's what it'll do. It'll spark a conversation, because I'll give you an example, Ted. When I was still in parish ministry, and I would do homebound, visit the sick and dying in my parish, many times in hospitals, nursing facilities, in the people's homes, you're going to meet people at different stages of life. And a lot of times, especially dealing with some of the older parishioners, these were men and women married many years, and maybe still married. Maybe their spouse is still with them, they're 60 years, 50 years. Longest married couple I've known is 75 years. I've known a number of couples married that long. But you meet their family. And what you'll meet is sometimes people who are cohabitating, they're not living in the light of the gospel. And so, but there's your chance. There's the opportunity, in those little moments, to spark a conversation. And never to be afraid. You pick your moments. You use good prudence, and so. But I've had many successful stories in those encounters to help people to see a richer picture, to see something greater. And especially when they come and let's say they're living, they're cohabitating, and so they say, we're having problems, we're struggling, and there's your moment to start talking about these beautiful understandings that the church advances, and to look at them. They're inquisitive. Sometimes they've never heard it. No one's ever spoken to them about it. No one's ever told them what they're doing is not good. And like you said earlier, it's not a question of love. It's obvious that they care for each other. They are sincere for the good of each other. They mean that, and they want to see that grow. But the love is reached a part where there's something that's causing it to be unable to move further. And there is that moment to say to someone, let me help you understand why. And you watch most, not always, because sometimes they're not ready for it. But a good many of them are, and they look at you, and they want to know why. What can I do more? And when you do that, it gives them an opportunity to grow. And all of a sudden, for that love to become something that they want, that it was possible. And that's why these kinds of moments, for us is so important. For me, it's never about just writing for the sake of writing an article. It's always with the intent of helping myself grow, in a greater knowledge and appreciation of what the Lord has revealed to us through His church and through the teachings of our bishops and in the Catholic moral tradition. But also, that I never know. This one article may touch that one individual in such a way that moves them in a new direction and gives them a chance to think of something they hadn't thought about before. And that is, it's worth, the time and energy put into them. And I'm hoping that, people who were reading the Washington Post, reading Miss Emba's article, and kind of saying, yeah, I've been here, are also going to be able to say, but she doesn't answer it. If you notice, if you get a chance, you read it, she talks about a new ethic, but she doesn't really explain, what that means. She uses the phrase of St. Thomas, but it doesn't develop. So maybe there'll be a sequel, and I'll be interested to see if that happens, because that'll give a chance to see where she takes it. Will she go in search of St. Thomas, and really read what St. Thomas says? And if she does, then a decision has to be made. She'll have to identify that there's something that needs to change. And really what needs to change is an understanding of the human person, an understanding of human sexuality, an understanding of where that gift of self-giving, which is the most intimate of relationships, which is in the sexual act between husband and wife, a very intimate, very personal relationship, a very life-giving, a very fruitful, a very it unites in ways that outside of that cannot do. And I'm hoping that's what she'll search for. And if she does, then maybe her next article will sound like our podcast.
That would be great. Let's pray for that. Anyway, with that said, there's a lot more we could say, but we'll just close out there. Thank you, Father, for bringing up. Maybe we can just show our viewers one more time both
Sure.
Humanae Vitae and the Humanae Vitae 50 years later. This is a reflection on the document, and I'll just hold up Humanae Vitae itself, originally promulgated in 1968 by Pope St. Paul VI. So anyway, thank you. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in, watching us on YouTube, listening to us on Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, other platforms. We're really grateful. Please like, subscribe, share, spread the word, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.